Hello, everyone. I'm Monique Kwachou, and my presentation today is about a paper I'm working on based on my graduate research. Paper is entitled "Leaving It to Chance: How a Cameroonian University is Unintentionally Producing African Feminists and Why It Needs to Be More Intentional." This research is primarily motivated by an epiphany I had when I was about to begin third year out of the 4 years that my undergraduate Women and Gender Studies program was. So prior to that, in the second year, we had learned all these theories explaining the global subordination of women and reasons why women were subordinated, coercive and voluntary theories and all of that. And we had also learned frameworks, an introduction to frameworks for putting women in development, putting women in there. That's with bad. So I was doing internship with a local NGO during the holidays, during the vacation period. This NGO had a project where they offered loans to women to empower them to set up businesses for themselves. And of course, this project seemed like a good idea, but in time I found out that it wasn't working. And why wasn't it working? We were giving women money and they would go back home and give their husbands or their brothers or their fathers. I don't think they did it intentionally. Perhaps it was to act like, honey, what should we do with this? And the man says, give me, I have something to do. And that's it. So we had to tell these women that we're giving this money to you. We are not giving it for your husband. We are not giving it for your father. And they will look at you and tell you, you once born and married or nawiti. And in other words, do you want to break my marriage or you want me to lose my husband? And it occurred to me that this project was never going to work. It wasn't going to work unless we changed the way these women thought. The women wanted to be empowered, but not so empowered that it would threaten what was dearer to them. We had to change the way they felt about themselves, felt about their relationships, felt about their social position before we could say we had actually empowered them. And of course, as I thought more and more about this, I looked into what makes us think the way we do. Of course, a lot of what our thinking comes from our socialization, be it from religion, peers, family, and of course, education. Education is that agent of socialization which I think we can turn around, we can use to positively socialize people. And that's what motivated this research. About the study, the research generally tries to answer two questions. How, if at all, did the contents of my University of Buea, undergraduate program influence students' attitudes and behavior in line with feminism? And to what extent can the department be credited, given that it's based in an African university? To what extent can we say that this department is creating distinctly African feminists? Back up first. So this research generally is doing an exploration into the influence of studying women and gender studies in the University of Buea. What's the context? The University of Buea is based in Cameroon, a generally patriarchal country. From the laws to the norms, like most other countries in the world, most societies, it's patriarchal. And women's subordination to men is the norm. Also, another aspect of the context particular to this study is that the participants, which are alumni and then current students of this department, were situated in a program which taught inherently mainstream or Western liberal feminist thought. Despite the fact that this degree program is being taught at an African university, it's necessary to make it clear that the undergraduate degree program had little to no exposure to African feminist thought. So yes, by the time I was graduating and my classmates were graduating, we didn't know who Oyemi was. We didn't know who Achononu was. We didn't know any African feminist scholar. We didn't know what African feminist thought exactly said. We knew of African feminism like one of the types of feminism which perhaps we had been taught in over the course of 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes in one class in our introductory year. So to that context, it's necessary to put that context out there to answer these questions. What methodology did I use? What was structure? What did I do? What I found out that while doing my review of literature, most of the studies that looked into influence of college on students were mostly done in the West. Most of the as were most of the researches that looked into the influence of studying women and gender studies in particular, and there were a lot of those that tried to weigh the advantages of studying women and gender studies or the impact of it on the society. But they are mostly in the Western context, most in the US. And I found only one which was in a more conservative context. That is the research by Halevi and Blumen 2006, where they studied the influence of studying women and gender studies, studying women's studies in an Israeli university on their Palestinian and Jewish students. Yes, comparatively. And most of these researchers, Halevi and Blumen aside, most of these researchers were done over the course of time. They were longitudinal researches, but because I was doing this as my master's research, as my graduate studies research, I was limited to time. I had just a few months, and of course, just a few weeks in the country. And so to make up for this, I did a cross-sectional qualitative study. By cross-sectional, I meant we looked at two different cohorts. We split up two different cohorts, before and after, which we're going to represent, let's say before and after, current students, currently enrolled students and graduates. And we'll look at how the influence could be before and after. And they will report themselves, they will self-report the influence they have felt of the program. So I did purposive and convenience sampling because I was out of the country, and I was in the country only for 3 months. So I sent out emails to Alumni Association. I asked participants or potential participants that if you're interested, this is what my research is about. If you're interested in being a participant, please let me know. The first 6 people to respond were selected. When I arrived Cameroon for the research during those 3 weeks, I also put up notices on campus. I went to classrooms. I pinpointed third-year students because at that time they would have done. This was the second semester. This was between April and May 2015. So by that time, these third-year students would have done 6 out of 8 semesters, which is 3 years of women's studies. So women and gender studies. So they should have had an idea by then, but should not have been so close to, let's say, the graduates or the alumni's level of influence. And I made sure that the alumni also had not done further studies. They had just their first degrees. None of the alumni students I used had, let's say, a master's degree or a graduate degree, which would put them so over the top in terms of influence, external influence. These 2 cohorts were given semi-structured interview questions, 20 even interview questions in all, and the only difference between those on the interview guide for the 2 cohorts is the question that asks them if you're employed or what are you aspiring to for in terms of employment. The undergraduate students that were still enrolled, of course, were asked what they were aspiring after, and those who were graduates were asked what they were employed in. That's it. Their analysis of the findings was done via interpretivist epistemology. And this interpretivist epistemology was informed by African feminist theory. In other words, we were interpreting the data using African feminist theory. Yes. We will break down everything and then make links between what African feminists think or have said and what these people said, or what was not said, and what rhymes or does not rhyme with African feminist theory. Questions were the questionnaire was in 4 parts. Of course, the demographic information, then there was the women's studies experience, then the questions that try to gauge how these students, what made them choose women and gender studies in the first place. Did they choose it? How they perceived the experience. Was it something? Was it what they expected it to be? Was it something they would do again? Those kind of things. Then there were questions on the influence of women and gender studies on their attitudes and behaviors, where we tried to gauge what had changed. Was there ever a time in class when you had an aha moment? Was there ever a time when you knew that you were making a decision based on what you had learned, and that it wasn't something you would normally do? Some sort of cognitive dissonance. We tried to find that there. And then the last section of the questionnaire tried to find out their stance on African feminist issues. Like, what was your, would you consider yourself African feminist? Would you consider yourself a feminist? Why or why not? What about African, what is your opinion of African feminism? What is African feminism to you? What is your opinion as in terms of issues like abortion, lesbianism, homosexuality? What is your stance in terms of, would you like a female president? Do you see women as leaders? Do you see, let's say, women as able to have sexual libido as compared to men? Those kind of things. So I try to find out what their stance is on these issues that African feminists have written on to some extent, or have criticized Western liberal feminist thought or black feminism for us. Findings. So to answer the first question, were they influenced? Yes. There was recognizable and reported information on influence of women and gender studies of the Women and Gender Studies program on all participants. Everyone said to some extent that yes, they had been influenced by this or that. It had made them maybe tell their boy or girl children to go to wash plates equally. It had also made them want to earn an income for themselves and not be dependent. Those kind of things. All but one of the participants reported that the course made them aware of inequalities that they had previously been unaware of. Yes, there were more. Some people said, I didn't even know there was something called FGM before I did this course. I didn't even know that the course made me realize that the inheritance procedure in my country was, in my village, was so biased. The course made me realize that our laws are so biased. I didn't know until I did this course that adultery is defined differently for men and women in our penal code, that kind of thing. All participants reported interest and involvement in some sort of social work or activism, which was inspired by the program. I recount a student, a participant, a graduate of the graduate cohort, who is a sickle cell anemia patient. And she says she's now an active voice of sickle cell anemia sensitization in the country because her experience with studying women and gender studies made her more vocal, made her know about exercising her rights, and made her know the power of voicing your experience. And of course, the internship she took made her know how to go about it. So, second question, can we say they were African feminists? Well, kind of. Let me explain. This one was more difficult to gauge. First off, you would need to consider what African feminists are. And in defining African feminism, one of the errors in our trajectory is that we define African feminism in contrast to Western feminism, in contrast or in the absence of something, what is missing in Western feminism. Our perspective, our African perspective is not there. Our cultural perspective is not there. So this does not suit us. This is not who we are. We are not this kind of feminist. Yes. Our black feminism too, did not sufficiently represent us. We are not so obsessed with race. We do not have a racial problem on the continent. We in most areas of the continent, we are not so open to the idea of, let's say, Alice Walker's humanism, saying sexually and asexually and all of that. No. They don't want to get certain African feminists have criticized these things. So we define African feminism mostly by undefining what these other things lacked for us. And so to prove, to gauge where these participants stood in terms of African feminism, we needed to put out these things to gauge their stance on it. And then we also need to consider the different forms of the different concepts which are in feminism, African feminism, and different concepts which make up African feminisms. And we need to also note that, like Nameka says, African feminism is a feminism of negotiation. So, quite frankly, anybody at different levels can interpret their stance or their level of feminism. And this made what we found out when considering all of these things is that the majority of participants, 9 out of 12, were unwilling to identify with the title feminists. And in rejecting the term title feminist, they often cited reasons that were akin to African feminist criticisms of Western feminism. Participants also shared similar areas of relating and dissenting with course content, meaning that they agreed on similar things. They rejected similar things, which showed, which was interpreted to say that this was normative influence. It was a social thing. It's something we all agree on, or something we all reject because of our similar cultural influence, similar normative influence, similar socialization. And finally, most participants expressed opinions and criticisms in line with African feminist theory of complementarity, motherism, Situanism, negofeminism. No subject, no one of them identified as an African feminist. Even those, even the three who said they were feminists rejected African feminism. And when asked why, they had similar responses. They felt that African feminism wasn't the original feminism. It wasn't the real one. It was quite less, and they didn't want to be less. So, what we found was that distribution, allocation of participants. If you look at the screen, you'll notice that feminists, the participants generally had 3 criticisms against feminism. Reasons why, even those that say they were feminists, even those who agree that they were feminists, had similar criticisms of feminism. 58% said they were against feminism because of unholy practices it encouraged, such as abortion and homosexuality. Others said they were against feminism because it encourages domination of one sex over the other, and bias. That one person said, this feminism thing is women. They like to make as if women are marginalized, but they also want to suppress men. And of course, there were those who said they didn't really consider themselves feminists because they thought it was impractical, that inequality was always going to be there. We are now not going to be the same. That it's not natural in itself. Then, of course, and there's distribution of participants' opinions based on feminist issues. Like I said earlier, the questionnaires had 4 sections. The last section, which gauged feminist stance, asked questions based on the a Likert scale of strongly for, neutral, against, and strongly against. And we asked participants certain things like occupational, what's your opinion on occupational equality, equal pay for both genders? What's your opinion on FGM, breast ironing? What's your opinion on men choosing not to marry or have kids? What's your opinion on women choosing not to marry or have kids? What's your opinion of sharing domestic chores? What's your opinion on paying of bride price? What's your opinion of having a female president? What's your opinion on polygamy, on controlling girls' dressing for decency? Those kind of things. And in analyzing this, I just want to take the words of some of the participants. 2 of them. One of them, Doreen, graduate, the oldest of the participants, and a mother of 3. She's a police officer. She says, and she's the first batch of female studies, women gender studies students. She says, I am not a feminist because I don't think we are oppressed. We have our problems like everyone else, but we are not in competition with men. We each have our roles. In trying to do everything, we are driving men away. And the truth is that this equality thing is impractical. My daughter might think that she should get the same size of fufu as her brother, but if I give her the fufu, we should be able to finish it. Another participant, who was a current student, said, I think feminism is borrowed like democracy. It's not all bad. I agree, women should have their rights, and she meant to property and work. And I agree that some practices like polygamy and FGM are bad. But my problem with feminists is some of the things they encourage, like abortion, homosexuality, etc. Saying it is a choice. Motherhood is sacred, and not all choices are good choices. Okay, so if you want to look at that, the issues that came up, that the issue that I brought up, like what sort of feminist are you if you say yes, we should have equal rights at work, but it's unseemly for me to choose that I don't want to have a child. It's yes, we should have the right to reject practice like FGM, but we shouldn't be rejecting our gender roles, our domestic roles as women who should cater to their men. To what extent are we feminism? That negotiation was observed in the participants. They tried to think about where are we now. Yes, I know that this thing is good. They took some of the information and influence. Yes, I know that this cultural practice, breast ironing, is bad because of this, and this. But I can't actually say that you choosing to have an abortion because you don't have a child is bad. Yes, I can choose to go to work or not go to work, but I shouldn't be able to choose not to cook for my husband. I shouldn't be able to choose not to want a husband. And these things you saw within them cognitive dissonance, as they try to put what they had learned and what they had been brought up to believe, try to make a sense of it. And most of the time they rejected certain things based not on feminism, even with those who claim they were feminists, not on feminism but on the rightness of it, the morals and the morals of it. And that also showed normative influence working to counter informational influence. What we came at the end of the research, the conclusions drawn were the following. We had, of course, yes, we could see that there was influence at varying degrees, but influence nonetheless. We could see that these are African feminists, despite college education rather than because of it. They don't identify as African feminists, but they have African feminist likeness. they express certain views that were that motherism, actually known as motherism, says, or Ogundipe Leslie's Situanism says, Doreen's thought, for example, or Oyewumi's complementarity. So the kind of department be credited for it? Not really. I don't think we can credit our department for it because, quite frankly, they didn't teach this. So we can say you don't need to be college educated to be an African feminist. Yes, we can say you don't need to have been taught African feminism to be an African feminist. Perhaps you just have to have the right amount of informational and normative influence to produce this. And students, though they portrayed African feminist leanings, another conclusion, students, though they portrayed African feminist leanings, cannot and do not identify as such because of lack of adequate knowledge. Perhaps if they were taught what African feminist scholars believe in, what African feminist scholars critique, the works of Gay or Gayumi or Oyewumi and the rest, perhaps if they are taught these things, they would call themselves African feminists, perhaps. Another conclusion we came to is that if our goal, as I believe our goal should be, with educating people with feminist studies, if our goal is to engender, to create more African feminist conscious society, then we need to be more intentional in teaching our own theory. We need to develop it better. We need to pass it on clearer. Because one of the reasons this African feminism is not taught, I asked the head of department, the pioneer head of department, Professor Joyce Enderley, and she says one of the reasons it is not taught at undergraduate level in depth is because it's confusing. They are trying to get these students to understand the difference between sex and gender. They're trying to get them to understand how these roles, how these gender roles are imposed on us, what equality really means, what difference between equity basics. So bringing in certain things like motherism and situanism, all the complex, the argument of choice, and whether certain choices should be made or certain choices should not be made. Bringing all these things in is complex, in her opinion, for undergraduate students, and that's why it's not in our syllabus. I have seen that there is, to an extent, African feminist knowledge is being taught at the graduate level, master's students, in not really in depth because there is no African feminist, there's no lecturer which is really specialized in African feminism in our department. I'm hoping to be. I'm still hoping to be, like, okay. Finally, we also need to outline. What I found is we also need to have a better outline of what African feminism is. One which is not convenient, one which is not fickle. We, as African feminists, for example, might say, oh yes, this is what we believe in. We take this section of liberal feminism. We agree with you on that. But we cut out this section. We don't want this. We don't want this part. Like we say, oh yes, our people, there is sexuality. We were always sexual beings from pre-colonial times. In fact, it is colonialism that inhibited our sexuality and made us to be more like Victorian women. And in saying this, we will agree that we were sexual beings. Yet, we will say, no, we don't want to express that form of sexuality. We cut out these things at our convenience. And it's like Professor Ndele explained, it's no longer clear. We choose and deny certain things so that we aren't actually passing on a clear message. What are we for? It shouldn't be about what we are against. What is African feminism for? And I agree that, and while I make this statement that we need to outline it better, I also understand that, like Naimeka says, our feminism is a feminism of negotiation. We are not one people. We are not the same people. We are one people, but we are not the same. Africans are a vast and eclectic and we need our feminism needs to reflect that eclectic nature, our eclectic nature, differences in religion, differences in culture, differences in experience, colonial experience, in daily experience. So yes, I appreciate that. I would call myself an African feminist because of nego feminism. But I also think, if we are going to have to pass this on, the trajectory needs to be clearer, needs to be more. It needs to be easier to pass on to the younger people, or else we're going to keep having African feminists who don't identify as such. Thank you.